So the World-Ecology Research Network is having their fifth annual conference at the end of the month, the end of May, here in San Francisco. And I've been trying to prepare a paper to present. I've been talking a lot about Marx lately. One of the reasons is, of course, the Peterson-Zizek event, but I've also been preparing for this conference. And the World-Ecology Network is was sort of born out of some of the research that Jason Moore did on what he calls a world ecological method, perhaps, a way of inquiring into capitalism, its relationship with the ecology of the earth and to humanity. And Moore is trying to combat Cartesian dualism, as he calls it, and he's looking for a more relational way of theorizing capitalism and the relationship between society and nature within the capitalist world order. He's critical of some other ecological Marxists, let's call them, namely the metabolic rift theorists, and John Bellamy Foster is probably one of the more important names there. He co-wrote this book, The Ecological Rift, with Brett Clark and Richard York. And Moore is critical of what he thinks is still a residual dualism here. And so, an example of what you would point to would be like comments like, what they're claiming to be doing is an analysis of the coevolution of nature and society. This nature and society trope, the "and" there, Moore is really zeroing in on that and saying that, for example, to say that capitalism is at war with the earth is to reify the divide between society on the one hand, namely the social order known as capitalism, is divided from the earth, as though there could be a rift. And indeed, the whole rift theory is that the metabolism of a capitalist order is out of step with the metabolism of the planet, the energetic, material, chemical, atmospheric, mineralogical, hydrological, like the capitalist world order is out of step with the biosphere and the geosphere, the life systems of the planet, and that there's an inherent contradiction between the capitalist logic and the laws of nature, let's call them. And so capitalism will inherently destroy the planet unless it is stopped. And so, the metabolic rift theorists are really calling for revolution, not just as Marx did because of the way that workers are being exploited, but because of the way that nature is being appropriated and destroyed and sucked dry of its energetic capacity to support the existence of life. Now, I enjoyed Moore's book. I learned a lot from it. It got me thinking. I'm working my way through Foster et al.'s Ecological Rift text here, and I'm enjoying this as well. And I think what I want to focus on, the whole point of my paper, I should say, if you haven't already guessed, is to bring Whitehead into this skirmish among the environmental sociologists and the, let's say, ecological Marxist scholars, to bring Whitehead into this skirmish and try to help sort things out. It's funny, and it's almost a joke, or maybe it's even cliche at this point to talk about the left eating itself, but it's strange to me that there's such a polemic underway among the Marxists, the so-called left, within the so-called left, such a diatribe, and it's like, why are we picking a fight with each other when clearly we share this common enemy, this common threat uh, that all sides agree needs to be resisted, and that alternatives need to be imagined. Why aren't we busying ourselves with that task instead of fighting with each other? Not that the issues that are being discussed aren't important, but I, said on Twitter, it feels to me a bit like an example of the narcissism of small differences. Um, and so I'm hoping that I can play diplomat here with Whitehead as my kind of interpretive key. And one of the issues that I want to dig into actually is, so for example, there's a chapter in Foster, Clark, and York's book, The Ecological Rift, called The Sociology of Ecology, and it goes into this debate in the 20th century, which continues to rage today, between the realists or the materialists, and they kind of equate realism and materialism on the one hand, and on the other hand, the social constructionists, which are more like the idealists, the almost postmodern, you could say. The social constructionists are critical of realism in science because it tends to naturalize, the social constructionists worry it tends to naturalize certain social conditions. Like the way that Jordan Peterson does when he talks about human social hierarchies as just an expression of the same sort of instinctual biological behavior that lobsters exhibit. It's this is what a social constructionist postmodernist would want to deconstruct and question. And the realists, on the other hand, are saying that human beings are a species of animal, and we evolved, and the same processes that condition and pressure and shape the evolution of all the rest of the life on this planet is going to continue to be effective within human society. This is the standard opposition, right? And they will say they're going to try to argue for realism and materialism, but of a constructionist sort. So they're breaking this easy division between materialism or realism and constructionism, and saying that no, we can have a realism and a materialism that's also constructionist, and isn't just essentialist, because that's what the social constructionists are worried about. And I know I'm throwing all these big abstractions around, but what I want to say and sort of interpolate into this way of framing things is that, when Foster et al. Says that they're seeking an analysis of the coevolution of nature and society, for Whitehead, nature is already social. So to say nature and society, I kind of see what Moore means here, how there is a sort of residual dualism at work there. And Moore doesn't work with or think with Whitehead, but if we do think with Whitehead, nature is a social affair from the beginning. And if we're worried about, if we're realists, and Whitehead is a realist, he's an organic realist, rather than a materialist realist. But if we're worried about human exceptionalism or human exemptionalism, where we say that the laws of nature don't apply to the human because the human is free, the human is conscious, the human, is ensouled. If we're worried about that sort of anthropocentrism, then there are two tactics we could take in response. One is to say that human beings are just part of a merely material nature, and that material forces shape our cultural expressions and our psychological moods and capacities. Or we could say that what we thought was special about human beings is in fact pervasive, We're not exceptional. We're an expression of something more generic and universal, even, namely, the capacity for value, the capacity for relationship is pervasive in the universe. It drives cosmic and biological evolution. So rather than being a materialist or an idealist, Whitehead's an organic realist, and organization is social. Whether that's the way that hydrogen atoms organize into a star, or stars organize into a galaxy, or the way that molecules organize into a cell, or cells organize into an animal. These are all social forms of social organization. To be organized is to be social. To be social is to be organized. And so Whitehead isn't an idealist in the sense that he thinks the physical world of our sensory embodied experience is an illusion, and what's really real are some eternal forms hiding behind or existing above and beyond. There are ideas, and they are efficacious in Whitehead's universe, but they're deficient in actuality, and they can only participate in existence if the physical world, the evolving cosmos, and the biological order allows for them to participate. And it's always in the experience of some organism that an idea becomes realized. Outside of the experience of some organism, ideas are nothing. And what Whitehead's pointing out to us, to materialists, say, he would say, you have a very anthropocentric idea of an idea. Ideas are not just inside of human heads. The idea of the good is at work in producing the light and warmth of the sun, as is the nuclear reactions and the electromagnetic radiation described by physicists. Whitehead would say that what physics is describing from one side is, from another side, the working out of ideas. Beauty is as much present in roses and in butterflies and in peacocks as it is in the Mona Lisa. Beauty is not a human contrivance. Beauty is an ideal that is luring the evolutionary process into deeper, richer, more intense forms of complexity. And the human is one expression of that evolutionary process, lured by beauty and other ideas. And so once we break out of the anthropocentric enclosure, not only do we have a new idea of society, we have a new idea of ideas. And so Whitehead's contribution, I think, to a group of Marxists, one of his contributions would be to amend the easy conflation of realism and materialism, and to reduce human consciousness merely to its social and material conditions. Merely to its historical and material conditions, is to neglect the extent to which consciousness is also an agent of novelty. And it's not that Whitehead denies the embodiment of consciousness and its social relationships and its historical embeddedness. It's that he reminds us that matter is one of the most abstract ideas that we have, actually. And that materialism is really the worst kind of idealism because it's an unconscious idealism. And that we need a more concrete ontology, and that organism is more concrete than materialism or idealism. But again, Whitehead's a realist. He says, he was a rugby player, right? And he wants to say to the idealist, you know, a rugby player knows what's real because he's been knocked over um, and tackled, and that's the real. And for Whitehead, that sort of energetic impulse is where uh, reality occurs. Um, it's not just a set of logical relationships between ideas that constitutes the really real for Whitehead. Um, it's the flood of emotion. It's the buzzing world of co-evolving organisms that is real. And I think this doesn't undermine Marx's critique of capitalism, but it allows us to see how there is something natural about capitalism. And while it's clear that whatever capitalism is, it's degrading the life systems of the planet, it's also clear that the first mass extinction was caused by anaerobic bacteria releasing oxygen pollution as a waste product, a metabolic waste product, and that um, almost ended this whole experiment on this planet, right? We're not the first organism to initiate a mass extinction, which isn't to justify, you know, what's happening. Anthropogenic climate change, anthropogenic mass extinction. Um, it's suicide for us, but it's also doing violence to the values which are uh, intrinsic to and at work within the non-human world. And this is where I think Whitehead goes further than Marx in allowing us to fully ecologize our critique of capitalism. It's not just that capitalism is killing us. It's not just that capitalism is undermining the human species' ability to produce value. It's that this arrangement of human society is treating the rest of the world as a mere stockpile of raw materials or as a mere trash bin to expel our waste into. I know ecological Marxists are critical of that understanding of the earth, but unless we're able to do more than just, if we're stuck with materialism as our ontology, how are we to attribute value to the non-human world, other than in terms of human values? So, anyways, those are just some of the thoughts I'm working with, and I'd appreciate feedback from any Marxists or Whiteheadians or whatever isms you find interesting. Thanks for listening.